Hello, everyone. Welcome to Promethean Action's live question and answer show. We do this show every Thursday at 11 a.m. Thank you for joining us for another show. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. If not, also thank you for coming back and joining us again. So we had collected, obviously, we try to do this every week. We collect questions mostly from our newsletter subscribers. But yesterday, a very tragic and terrible event happened, which everyone knows about. So we kind of changed the format of the show. I'm going to give the show to Barbara Boyd, and she's going to take up the question of what happened yesterday. And then Susan will speak. And we're also going to be taking questions about this and 9/11 in the chat. So we are going to be prioritizing more live chat questions today. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Barbara.
Yeah, first I'd like to tell our international audience a little bit about Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated yesterday. And in many respects, you probably have a little bit of difficulty understanding why this has had such a profound impact on people here in the United States, and particularly within the Trump movement. Now, Charlie started out as a political organizer at all of 18 years old. And he did so because he thought he was on a divine mission to actually save the nation's youth, having perceived that the universities and the culture was being taken over by an alien force, if you will. And he was, in many respects, what you might call a modern Socrates. He believed in the power of dialogue to actually discover truth. He went repeatedly into the lion's den of college campuses throughout the United States, and he loved doing it. He loved the actual process of argument and dialogue to discover truth, even among those who he virulently disagreed with. He built, and this was a primary accomplishment of his, a youth movement around this entire nation, which had not existed before, called Turning Point USA. He went out at a very young age and actually found the people who would finance that youth movement within the Republican Party. And he basically educated himself, self-educated in the classics, but most importantly, in everything that you could learn from the Bible itself. He was a biblical scholar. He argued religion vociferously with people in the sense that he believed that Christ was a divine entity sent here to actually save mankind from the sin of this world. And so he was driven by that divine mission in everything that he said or did. If you will, Adam, I'd like you to play President Trump's discussion from the Oval last night first, so that we can focus everybody on how this impacted the president personally.
Fellow Americans, I am filled with grief and anger at the heinous assassination of Charlie Kirk on a college campus in Utah. Charlie inspired millions, and tonight all who knew him and loved him are united in shock and horror. Charlie was a patriot who devoted his life to the cause of open debate and the country that he loved so much, the United States of America. He fought for liberty, democracy, justice, and the American people. He's a martyr for truth and freedom, and there's never been anyone who was so respected by youth. Charlie was also a man of deep, deep faith, and we take comfort in the knowledge that he is now at peace with God in heaven. Our prayers are with his wife, Erica, the two young, beloved children, and his entire family, who he loved more than anything in the world. We ask God to watch over them in this terrible hour of heartache and pain. This is a dark moment for America. Charlie Kirk traveled the nation, joyfully engaging with everyone interested in good faith debate. His mission was to bring young people into the political process, which he did better than anybody ever, to share his love of country and to spread the simple words of common sense. On campuses nationwide, he championed his ideas with courage, logic, humor, and grace. It's a long past time for all Americans and the media to confront the fact that violence and murder are the tragic consequence of demonizing those with whom you disagree day after day, year after year, in the most hateful and despicable way possible. For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now. My administration will find each and every one of those who contributed to this atrocity and to other political violence, including the organizations that fund it and support it, as well as those who go after our judges, law enforcement officials, and everyone else who brings order to our country. From the attack on my life in Butler, Pennsylvania last year, which killed a husband and father, to the attacks on ICE agents, to the vicious murder of a healthcare executive in the streets of New York, to the shooting of House Majority Leader Steve Scalise and 3 others, radical left political violence has hurt too many innocent people and taken too many lives. Tonight, I ask all Americans to commit themselves to the American values for which Charlie Kirk lived and died, the values of free speech, citizenship, the rule of law, and the patriotic devotion and love of God. Charlie was the best of America, and the monster who attacked him was attacking our whole country. An assassin tried to silence him with a bullet, but he failed, because together we will ensure that his voice, his message, and his legacy will live on for countless generations to come. Today, because of this heinous act, Charlie's voice has become bigger and grander than ever before, and it's not even close. May God bless his memory, may God watch over his family, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Now, it's not just President Trump who is delivering exactly that message as to who this man was. In addition, J.D. Vance published on X his entire account of his relationship with Charlie Kirk, starting with a phone call going back to 2017. I think it's a remarkable message which everybody should read, and Adam probably has it in the file, but it essentially says that without Charlie, Vance would not be the vice president of the United States. It was Charlie who essentially saw his talent and encouraged him to actually become political, and to become political in the Trump movement. And to Charlie, JD says he owes his entire political life in many respects. He ends it by saying what we must all be saying at this point. We've got this now. You did your part. And finally, in terms of just my last kind of viewpoint from a different angle of Charlie, you can see why J.D. Vance said this. I just want Adam to play briefly the video from X showing Charlie on election night 2024. He had built a movement throughout every single state in the United States among young people, completely unanticipated, and which carried, in many respects, the election for Donald J. Trump. So, Adam, if you could just play that short, I'd appreciate it.
Let's do this, baby. Woo! Come on.
Let's go.
There it is.
Clean up, clean up,
All
clean
right.
up.
Ah, the
Let's
run
go.
on.
Huge win. Oh my gosh. This almost seems a little surreal.
Everybody should remember this moment. Look, I'm gonna echo Charlie from earlier. Remember where you were when this happened. Remember where you were when you realized that the Uniparty and all of these, just the establishment, they did not expect this.
I think that basically was his moment of mission accomplished. So, I think that sort of establishes one thing about this heinous act. And what I'd like to also talk about is briefly its strategic context. You can look right now at Europe, which is devolving into outright fascism. The very thing that Charlie stood for, the freedom of speech, the freedom of dialogue, the freedom of a free exchange of ideas by which we actually arrive at truth, is under concerted attack because what is going on between the British and Brussels at this point, and I don't think they're independent, is the complete killing of speech, the rigging of elections, everything we saw here, because Europe is rapidly descending into a depression. You see, just ahead of Charlie Kirk's assassination, the Abraham Accords in the Middle East being attacked and left particularly almost in shambles by Netanyahu's attacks in Qatar. You see the Polish incident, so-called, in which every effort is being made to draw us again into a European war. The oligarchy is on its back foot, and they want very much for the United States to descend into a violent civil war. In many respects, it's very similar to the overall strategic context, which happened before 9/11, 2001. Lyndon LaRouche predicted way back, 6 months earlier, that we would have the equivalent of a Reichstag fire in the United States. For those who don't know, the Reichstag fire was the famous incident staged by the Nazis in Germany, the burning down of the Parliament building, which led directly to Adolf Hitler's ascension to dictatorship. And what happened, obviously, is that's what happened off of 9/11. You had Dick Cheney, you had George W. Bush, who was the idiot president equivalent of Joe Biden, a vacant presidency, a vice president in that respect, who was actually running things in the form of Dick Cheney. And you had the Patriot Act and the attempt to impose mass surveillance, mass propaganda, the curtailment of the very thing that Charlie Kirk stood for on the American people. And we've suffered from that ever since in our civic life and in the polarization which actually resulted from that. Finally, just in terms of my opening, I'd like to actually have Adam play a very prescient moment, a speech which many people, the young people who are devastated right now by the death of someone who led them, I'd like to compare it to another moment in my personal history, which was the assassination of Martin Luther King, and the speech given by Robert F. Kennedy prior, of course, to his own assassination about the King assassination in Indianapolis, Indiana. As a result of that speech, in which disregarding all of his security, Bobby went into a crowd and announced the death of Martin, are remarkable words of wisdom for this very moment. So, Adam, if you could go ahead and play that speech.
And lawlessness, but his love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past. but we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness, and it's not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings that abide in our land. And what dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. Thank you very much.
Now I want to hand it over to Susan to talk about unless Adam has something to intervene with, and we'll just go. We're a little bit raw here, so don't, this is not going to be the most perfect presentation we've ever done. I didn't know Charlie, but I find myself, like many, many others, deeply, deeply, deeply impacted by his death.
Absolutely. Thank you, Barbara. If you're joining us for the first time, my name is Adam. This is Barbara and Susan. We're all with Promethean Action. We do 3 political updates a week, plus this live question and answer show every Thursday. We usually take questions from our email newsletter. If you're interested in getting our email newsletter, we'll send you updates when we go live, when we do our shows, the articles that we write. You can get our free newsletter by going to prom.ac or just search the web for Promethean Action. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It does help the YouTube algorithm. Okay, so we are getting some good questions, but for right now, I want to continue by handing it off to Susan.
All right. Thank you, Adam. In times of great tragedy, people turn for solace to their faith, the Bible. Other people turn to, or in addition, people turn to great classical literature, as Bobby Kennedy did in that quote. He quoted more extensively from Aeschylus, I believe, at another point in that speech. On a personal note, a few weeks after Bobby gave that speech in Indianapolis, I joined his campaign and was campaigning with him on the West Coast until his assassination. But in addition to faith and great classical art, actually, today, of course, is the anniversary of 9/11. And I remember distinctly, within a week, possibly a week and a half of the 9/11 attack, the New York Symphony, Philharmonic, whatever, pulled itself together and did an extraordinary performance of Brahms' German Requiem, one of my favorite pieces. And that provides a balm, that kind of great classical music, Mozart's Requiem, Brahms' German Requiem, other great pieces, is a balm for the soul. But in addition to all of that, my faith, my love of classical music, I also turn to my best friend. And actually, you can see very blurrily in the back a picture of him. My best friend is Plato, who was a student of Socrates. And I would like to present to people a bit of an insight, I think, of the political battles that Socrates himself was involved in and the impact of his death on really the development of Western civilization as another source of comfort, in the sense that Charlie's death is not going to be in vain. Plato was his young student, and he was only 29 years old in 399 BC when Socrates was executed. So more or less of the same generation as Charlie Kirk in terms of years. Socrates was executed by the Democratic Party of Athens. There had been a previous government of tyrants, but they were overthrown, and it was the Democratic Party of Athens which carried out the execution of Socrates. Why was he executed? One of the charges is that he was corrupting the youth of Athens. And what did they mean by that? Well, his corruption was precisely what Charlie Kirk did: dialogue, especially to go among the young elite of Athens, in the public squares, in the living spaces of some of the elites of Athens, but in particular, focused on the young people of Athens to challenge them to look at their underlying axioms. I mean, I'm thinking about that from the standpoint of what J.D. Vance just said, because clearly Charlie challenged his axioms. We all know J.D. Vance changed from someone who had opposed Donald Trump, but had enough courage to examine his axioms, realize that he was wrong in the way that he was thinking, and of course became a passionate supporter of President Trump, and I believe one of the future hopes of this country. And the reason that, besides the fact that he had a passionate love for the truth, Socrates was challenging these young leaders of Athens, because Athens had disintegrated from its earlier greatness when, as one small city-state, it had succeeded in defeating the empire of the day, which was the Persian Empire, in the 480s and the 490s. And Socrates embarked. He was born around, I believe, 470, if I remember correctly, BC. Socrates embarked on a lifelong mission to challenge the future leaders of Athens to understand why they thought what they thought. Because what he saw happening to Athens is what we've seen to our country, in a certain sense, in the wake of World War II, where we became the arsenal of democracy, we became the defender of freedom. And then over these decades, we've seen increasingly how the population got smaller, more susceptible to public opinion, manipulation, and so on, until Donald Trump came along and in essence began to burst the narrative and allow people to think. But both Socrates and Charlie Kirk played a vital role in that, in the sense of going out and constantly challenging the young people of society. Now, in the case of Socrates, in one respect, you could say he failed, because Athens continued to disintegrate. It got pulled into the Peloponnesian War, which was essentially another one of those forever wars being manipulated from the outside. Choose your side, Sparta or Athens. But in the background was the Persian Empire. And the population became more and more susceptible to what is known as sophistry. And if you don't know the word sophistry, don't worry, you experience it every day. Just go look at the talking heads on Sunday morning. Margaret Brennan, Kristen Welker. This is modern day sophistry, where they just play with words in order to create a particular effect. They could care less. They wouldn't know truth, frankly, if it hit them in the face. And sophistry had indeed taken over Athens and contributed to the disastrous decisions that they made in continuing the war, the Peloponnesian War, and then in the wake of their loss in the Peloponnesian War, a series of disastrous governments which continued to destroy and undermine the potential for Athens to continue to survive. And it was at the end of that Peloponnesian War, where so many of the young people that Socrates had tried to engage to get them to understand what was wrong with the way they were thinking, not the things that they thought, but the way that they were thinking, It was at the end of that process of disintegration, when the Democrats came to power in Athens, that Socrates was arrested and he was put on trial. Now, again, you could say that in a certain sense he failed because Athens really truly did disintegrate. But in a much more profound sense, he did not fail. In the final dialogue, which Plato wrote about Socrates, called the Phaedo, it takes place in Socrates' jail cell. And Socrates is talking to his family and his closest friends, including some very young people. And he develops in the most powerful way the fact that they should not be sad that he's about to be executed, because he believes that his soul is immortal. And at one point, toward the very end, when he asks for his wife and family to be taken out of the room, and some of the men who were left in the room with him are crying and carrying on, he says, why are you crying? We just had a discussion about the immortality of the soul. I do not fear giving up my physical body for this process. Now, it was Socrates' sacrifice and his mission which inspired Plato. Again, he was 29 when his teacher, Socrates, was executed. And I don't believe we would have Western civilization in the form that we have it if it were not for Plato. So I think the question of turning to history and the great classics, especially at this moment, I'm sure everyone is turning to their Bible. But I also recommend that people turn to Plato, and in particular, that final dialogue, the Phaedo, which is just a glorious discussion of the question of immortality and clearly represents, I think, the strength that we all need to carry on and complete this mission. So I will leave my remarks there.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everyone. I am seeing all of your questions and comments come in. I haven't been typing too much in there, but I've been watching everything that's been coming in. Thank you for all the support. So I just want to kind of get started with some of the questions that we had lined up. Are you both okay with that? Okay, so the first question, I think, captures a lot of the rage that people feel, rightfully so. And I'm going to take a question from, and this is a real raw question. Jerry, this is a question from Jerry in Alaska. And Jerry, I didn't censor your question this time, but I did take out the bottom half just for brevity. I think this is the key point that is going to resonate with a lot of people. And we don't condone this behavior. I just want to show everyone that this is on the mind of the world. So he wrote this to me yesterday. Adam, after today's tragedy, I simply must again write you. I remember you reading my first letter on the first Thursday Zoom meeting with the ladies. You censored my letter, not telling the audience what I said about Civil War 2.0. I saw this coming 40 years ago. After Charlie Kirk today, the white Ukrainian girl's neck stabbing on the subway a couple of days ago, let's not forget the Catholic school shooting just 2 weeks ago, the ongoing left's trying to block ICE in the inner cities. I say this, the damn civil wars already started. And again, I say, throughout human history, freedom has been bought but by two coins of the realm, blood and bullets. While I applaud Promethean Action's efforts, there is simply not enough time anymore to try and unbrainwash the masses and educate them in order to savage this tattered and torn republic. The City of London imperialists are 2 centuries entrenched universally, too powerful, too damn everything. As of today, more than ever, I feel the deep state will take out Donald Trump before Christmas, and then the whole MAGA movement will come to a grinding halt. Thank you, Jerry, for bringing up, you're bringing up at least three or four very important points that I think Barbara and Susan are going to want to address.
Yeah, I'll start. November 5th, 2024 refutes your message completely. If you think about the journey which we were all on, and you just saw Charlie Kirk crying in the form of mission accomplished, at least temporarily. You saw that the impossible, what would seem impossible from the framework you're addressing things, actually happened. I.e., the American people rallied. They rallied across all of the divisive lines which have been set up for them. And they rallied to elect Donald Trump to enact essential change. That change is not going to be, kind of a serene, you vote and suddenly everything changes. This is, as you say, a battle against an imperial force which has been empowered ever since, in its most recent form, the end of World War II. So yes, we fight against principalities and powers, as the Bible says. We're fighting. That is indeed the eternal battle of mankind. And the president and Charlie Kirk and everybody else have outlined the way you actually win this battle. It may come at a certain point to the necessity for violence, but I do not believe we're even close to that point yet, because I'm looking at essentially what is the attitude of the American people. It is a war. You're correct about that. It is not a civic debate. All right. We have a media which is essentially engaged full time as a subversive force, driving people towards this kind of pessimistic viewpoint. What Charlie was trying to do is to educate people in the fundamental principle of how you win a war, which is through optimism. You have to define your mission, and you have to basically carry it out against all obstacles. You may ultimately in this life lose, as Susan just went through, talking about Socrates or Plato. And winning is very much a question of whether you embrace the principle, which Charlie Kirk embraced, which is next man or woman up. The way you defend Donald Trump is precisely that, next man or woman up. You have to create a movement. You've got to create a movement of people who are as profoundly educated as Charlie Kirk educated himself, which is one of the most remarkable things about him. He didn't go to college. He was a high school dropout. He read and read and read, and then went out and argued and argued and argued and refined his axiomatic assumptions, as Susan says, accordingly. He changed. He changed himself in order to meet the next day of the battle and what he would have to bring to that, both emotionally and also intellectually, from the standpoint of understanding the enemy and understanding how to attack it and understanding how to win the battle. I don't have an opinion yet as to who done this. I only know the purpose of this, given who Charlie Kirk was and given the overall environment in the world at this point. And it is the purpose to actually drive us into a civil war through pessimism, through the idea that you can't win. And basically, we refuted all of that, or should have, given the enormous journey we took to get Donald Trump elected. Now we have another enormous journey which we have to undertake, which is to secure that election in 2026 through the midterms. And Charlie has given us, if you actually think about it, both the spirit and the activity by which we accomplish that. You change people through dialogue. You get above the news cycle and actually look at the strategic situation and determine how you can most effectively intervene to change people. And that, I think, is the answer to your question. I understand the rage. I understand the victimhood which people often feel, but the idea here is don't be a victim. Actually be the very best that you can possibly represent as a Promethean, if I might, from the standpoint of who we actually represent ourselves to be. Remember that Prometheus stole fire from the god Zeus, who represented an unchangeable, all-powerful oligarchy, or apparently so. What did he give mankind? Fire, i.e. both an energy source and the driver of the soul, and also foresight, foresight and hope, both of which had been absent in the fixed world of the oligarchy. And those two very powerful emotions, basically some people would say they're fool's errands on this earth. Not true. You can actually change things. And that's what we learned in November of 2024.
Yeah, I'll also just add, Jerry, I saw this coming 56 years ago, when, as a college student, I was in California campaigning my heart out for Robert Kennedy, and he was assassinated. That was one encounter I had. I was also with our movement in Washington, D.C. in 1981. I was on Capitol Hill covering a hearing when Ronald Reagan was almost assassinated. And since I had White House press credentials, I was told to go to George Washington Hospital with the rest of the press corps to wait and find out if that president had been assassinated. He was not, but frankly, much of the promise of his administration was assassinated with that bullet because it allowed the Bush forces to essentially take over. The person that was really the mentor for both Barbara Boyd and I, Lyndon LaRouche, in the late 1980s, was given the Trump treatment and was framed up and sent to prison, along with a lot of our associates. We've been through some very dark times. But what I can tell you is in this long journey that I've taken of over 56 years, I've seen at each step more and more people wake up. Sometimes it's the tragedy or the atrocity which wakes people up. But as long as you have leadership, which we have now with Donald Trump, with his absolutely unbroken spirit, each one of these tragedies will bring more people to the good cause of this fight. And I'll just take it right back around to Prometheus. Another piece I encourage people to read is Prometheus Bound, because there is an amazing section in there. He's chained to a rock. He's being tortured by Zeus. He's immortal. So an eagle comes and picks out his liver every night, but he's immortal, so it grows back. So the torture happens again the next day. And of course, he's being told to make a plea deal so that, the torture will end. He refuses to do it because he's fighting for mankind. But one of the most amazing parts of this play is what happens when another horrific thing happens. Zeus is mad at him and he brings the mountain down on his head. But what has happened before that? He's got an audience of sea nymphs, a chorus, as you often have in Greek plays. And they're watching Prometheus's suffering, but they're also watching his courage. And they've seen an example in the course of the play of how evil the gods are, how horribly evil the gods are. And at the point when this next great catastrophe is about to happen, what happens? The chorus says, we're not leaving. We're joining with Prometheus. We are inspired by what he has done. And I have seen that especially over the course of the past decade with Trump's emergence and the emergence of this movement, that each one of these atrocities, rather than fueling the enemy's ability to win, actually fuels our ability to win.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, I'm going to take the number one question that's been coming up in the chat, which I'm sure you both probably have some sense of what's coming, but it's going to surround Israel and Charlie Kirk's connection to supporting Israel as a state. And he was also critical of a lot of the Jewish, like the ADL in the United States. So I think we have to address it. literally every third question is coming in. How to disengage from Israel. The Bolsheviks are alive and active. And then somebody said that would be Bolsheviks working under Crown direction. I think that's probably closer what it is. Here's somebody else. On catch up here, do they not mention Israel in 20 minutes of talking? So what is the relationship between Charlie Kirk and Israel? Did Israel, was it the Mossad? That's coming up in the chat too. Was this Mossad? Here's something that came up immediately in the discussion. Yeah, I've heard he's been telling his friends that he suspected Israel was trying to kill him. So what are your thoughts on this question that everyone's asking?
I think that first of all, let me say that people are jumping to their preferred conclusions, which is exactly what Charlie Kirk lived to have people not do. All right. I don't know that Israel had anything to do with this. You could basically say that it might be, if there's a foreign source, it could equally be Ukraine. It could equally be any one of a number of other people who essentially, are out as assassins today. Remember that we understood from the former FBI director that there were multiple assassination squads out for Trump from foreign sources in the United States, Iranian, also Ukrainian, and I don't think that we should jump to a conclusion here yet. From my understanding from the press conference this morning in Utah, we're very close to finding the actual assassin. His rifle has been found. They have pictures of him. They're using their technology to actually track down and identify this person. But I don't think that you can come to that conclusion at all. And it also represents, a really bad kind of understanding of how these types of state assassination operations work. The primary place where 9/11 took place, where everything else that's happened in that framework has taken place, is through the auspices of the modern British Empire. It has assassins, state assassins, in many, many other places of the world, because assassination is a tool of state terrorism. So, I'm waiting to see what happens with the investigation. I have a great deal more faith in this particular investigation than I have in any other, because this was personal to the director of the FBI, to the director of the intelligence community, to the director of the CIA, to Donald Trump. And they're not going to leave any stone unturned, because they understand that the next target is the president himself. So, I think people have to just cool it. Don't use your extant ideas of it's true. All right. The British, have used Israel as an assassination capability. And that's the primary way that Israel has functioned throughout the Middle East. That's the specialty of the Mossad. Does that mean that they actually were the people who did this? I could basically say, for equal reasons or potential reasons, it could be radical Islam. Again, another British surrogate. Ukraine, we sponsor or have sponsored, along with under Biden and along with the British, the assassination capability that exists throughout Ukraine. So there's a number of suspects here, and people are just wrong to jump to their conclusions of who their preferred enemy image is. That's just wrong. So that's where I'll leave it.
Adam, could you share the screen?
Yes.
Okay. I recommend, this is a moment when people should get a copy of our ebook. You can either get it in the Promethean Action store, or you can go to Promethean Action and go to the Toolkit tab. Adam might put a direct link up there. But this is an ebook that we produced, I believe, 2 years ago, A Police Dossier. It is the British Who Murder Our Presidents. Because I think the important thing in terms of how to think about this is really your historical methodology. You know, there's often connectos. You can draw every connecto in the book. You can go back to the JFK assassination, and you can find connectos to the mafia. You can find apparent connectos to Cuba, although that's obviously a little more sketchier in terms of understanding who Lee Harvey Oswald actually was. If you drowned yourself in the world of connectos, you're not going to understand anything, and more importantly, you're not going to be able to do anything about it. What we go through in this dossier is not only the fact that it is the British, and in this dossier we look at Abraham Lincoln, we look at William McKinley, we look at John Kennedy, and then we look at the Russiagate attacks against Donald Trump. It was written before, I believe, the recent the 2024 assassination attempts against Trump. But what we develop in there is why it is that the British Empire hated these individuals and what it is that they feared that they had to deploy their assets to try and stop them, because it's in that domain. What is it that they were afraid of that you will discover what we need to know to actually defeat them? So again, this is really a question of method. And it is a method which gets down to what are the underlying principles? What is the principal difference between an imperial system and a republic? And you can go back to Plato for that, or you can start with this dossier.
Thank you, Susan. If you're joining us for the first time, I'd like to welcome everyone. My name's Adam Sturman. I'm a producer and editor here with Promethean Action. We do 3 political updates a week on this channel, plus 1 live question and answer show every Thursday we begin at 11 a.m., go for about an hour or 2. If you're joining us for the first time, please like and subscribe to the channel. We don't want you to miss our next video. And if you've been with us for a while, want to take the next step and see what we're doing more closely, I urge you to just take a few moments, just get our free newsletter. You can go to prom.ac or just search the web for Promethean Action. Will be the first link on your search results. So I'm going to take excuse me, wrong button. I'm going to take another question here, which I think is everyone is thinking about, but I think is a pretty serious thing. Simply, I feel Charlie's death was a warning to Trump.
I think that's true. It's obvious if you look at it that everything that Charlie was doing, that the president was doing, is to take down the modern British financial empire. There are multiple fronts that we're attacking now, which are almost like the pillars of the empire. The Federal Reserve, number 1. The deep state, number 2. The forever war mechanism, number 3. And the complete change of the world economy from a globalist framework through tariffs and other means, and the reshoring of all of our manufacturing and potential industrial capacity back to the United States to make the United States again the primary economic power and scientific power in the world. That is not what they wanted to accomplish after the end of World War II. They wanted to subjugate us and bring us back into the empire. So yes, that's exactly what it's intended to do. It's intended to sow fear. It's intended to make you step back and say, gee, I don't know whether I actually want to do this at this point, and I'm going to leave Donald Trump and Charlie Kirk hanging out there with no immortality. Or you can choose what we've chosen to do, which is to say, put it all on the line. The Republic is at stake. This is not the time for, as Thomas Paine said, for sunshine patriots. It's a time, I'm sure Charlie would say, looking down, don't mourn, organize. Get out there and actually take this and make it your mission to, change this world the way that I was trying to change it. Otherwise, you leave him hanging and you leave the president hanging. And the defense to assassination is, again, the assassin knowing that if they do it, the penalty is that they themselves will be found. Not only that, but that a new movement will emerge in the wake of that, which is far stronger than it existed today. And that's the only repellent you actually have.
Yeah, I just add that if you look at the assassination of our presidents, going back to especially Lincoln and McKinley, what you actually find is that something else was assassinated, really with the assassination of McKinley. And that was the knowledge of the American system of political economy. For the entirety, most of the 20th century and now into the opening decades of the 21st, Americans have been denied the knowledge of the powerful system given to us by George Washington, by Alexander Hamilton, by Abraham Lincoln. Instead, you've been told your choice is between communism and capitalism, free markets or government control. And I think the biggest threat represented by the Trump administration at this point is the reemergence of a concept of the American system of political economy, which is one in which the government has a positive role to play in fostering and protecting the producers of your nation while penalizing the imperial parasites. And you see evidence of this throughout the discussions in the administration, throughout their policies. Some of them have put the name American system to it. Some of the leaders of the administration, J.D. Vance, I believe Scott Bessent, they have referenced at least Alexander Hamilton and his tariff policies and so on. But as Barbara said, the more people who understand the power of the power embedded in the American system of political economy to make our nation economically sovereign, to work with other economically sovereign nations, that the spread of that is what the empire fears the most in terms of their economic and political control over the world. And I think the best defense Donald Trump can have at this point is every single person watching this or views it afterwards immerses themselves in an understanding of the American system, commits themselves to ensuring that this becomes the policy of the United States, and then puts the power of the imperial elite in the trash can of history where it belongs. That's how we defend our patriots.
Thank you, Susan. Sorry, guys, in the chat, I had to turn on slow mode. I'm the moderator, so it was getting hard for me to even read the chats and pick out which ones I wanted to pick. So please now put your questions for Barbara and Susan in the chat. We really want questions about what people are thinking about the Charlie Kirk assassination, but also 9/11. I was preparing to do something, talk more about 9/11, because personally, that was a big turning point in my life when I started to get political. But I put that on the side in remembrance of Charlie Kirk. But we will also take your questions on 9/11 and its lasting effects. Okay, so let me go to another question that came up, and this is from Kevin. Is it time for Trump to directly call out the British financial empire? He's avoided calling them out, maybe for good reason, but it seems like it could unite everyone now. So thank you, Kevin, for your question.
Well, he has, in many respects. He calls them the globalists. We call them the British financial empire. I think we're talking about the same force in history. It's a difference, I think, of nomenclature. He has a profound love of England and Scotland. And it becomes somewhat confusing, I believe, when we say modern British financial empire, when he wants to say, it's London, Brussels, France, and all these idiots who essentially are assembled in the World Economic Forum and similar consensus building institutions. Like Charlie, he went into the heart of the beast at the World Economic Forum in a very famous speech in his first administration. And he said, the future belongs to the patriots and not the globalists. That is essentially the sort of battle cry of what the modern British financial empire is all about. The end of the nation state. They needed to destroy the nation state formations and the individual cultures within nation states in order to exert control over the world economy. And they did so through these kind of world government institutions like the United Nations, like the World Economic Forum, like the Bilderberg Society, all the things which many of the conspiracy theorists who are with us know very, very well, like the Roundtable movement. And the overall thrust of that was not, for every nation state, its primary target was the United States of America. The Rhodes Will, after all, says ultimately that what we're trying to do here is reabsorb the United States into the Commonwealth. All right. And the Commonwealth, for those who don't know, is a bunch of people all functioning under the British crown, but as subjects, not as citizens. So I think when the president's very aware of what we're talking about, we just use different names for it.
Well, I'll say there's a part of me that agrees with that question, which is, wow, it would be a whole lot easier if Donald Trump used the term British Empire. But I think it gets to a question of actually educating the American people and more broadly the other citizens of the world. There's a problem when you fixate on a noun. I mean, we see that all the time. We get a lot of questions. It's the Rothschilds. It's the Jews. It's the this, the that. Anything you can put the in front of, you're probably thinking wrong, because it's a principle. It's a principle that goes way back to the mists of time. It's a principle which Aeschylus talks about in Prometheus Bound. It's a principle which infuses Socrates' life and Plato's dialogues. It's a principle which you find in the most manifest form, obviously, in Christianity. But if people get too comfortable with just a noun and they sort of turn their minds off, we're not where we have to be. It's important for people to think through, what is it about empire which is evil? What is the difference between the imperial view of man, which is that man is merely an animal to be manipulated or deployed, and culled, as the current king once said, versus the Platonic and then more powerfully the Christian image of man, that we are all in the image of the Creator. So if you want to use a noun as a kind of metaphor where you've worked through the principles and you know what you mean when you say this and you actually understand the principles, okay, use the noun. But I'm much more interested in people actually understanding the principles. Somebody had just said, it's a war of philosophy. Absolutely. And that's why I think we are also confident that we can win, because the ideas that we're fighting for, the ideas that Charlie fought for, the ideas that Trump is fighting for, are actually in harmony with God's universe. That's where our power lies. Their ideas are not. So if we fight this war at the highest level of philosophy, of spirituality, and enough people do, then we can win.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. If you're joining us for the first time, thank you. Please like this video. If everyone right now liked this video, we would double the amount of likes. It would help us get more exposure on YouTube. Thank you for tuning in. We do a live question and answer show every Thursday. Please subscribe to our channel, hit the bell icon so you could be notified when we go live next time. We do 3 political briefings a week. So I'm going to continue taking questions here because there's so many of them coming in. I think this one's a little bit, not really a little bit edgy, but this one kind of is echoing kind of what's going on in the United States now. Okay, this is from Coldwater. I'm not saying it's the Jew, but sometimes it is a Jew and they pretend they do not exist. And I think you guys know who Magnus Hirschfeld was, he was the leader of the gender changing movement in Weimar Germany right before Hitler came to power. So I think there's a lot of historical parallels to be drawn to what's going on in today's trans movement, and how you're getting these 2 formations. You're getting this super liberal Magnus Hirschfeld style gender ideology on one side, and then you have the birth of these, what seems to be happening more in the United States. You're getting this really agitated part of the population that says we want civil war, or that we want to go back to some more authoritarian world like under Hitler. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I come back to the fact that I think that Netanyahu has actually ignited through the various media operations which are going on around the current war in Israel, a wave of anti-Semitism such that I haven't really seen in my lifetime. Just to give you some background as to the authority by which I'm saying this, in the 1970s, Lyndon LaRouche, and I have to say here that we're not associated with his wife or their organizations in any kind of way, but Lyndon LaRouche was invited to the Middle East by the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, and also by circles in Israel around Abba Eban. And he basically was asked and delivered on a plan for development of the entire area. And when he got back to the United States, he was immediately labeled an anti-Semite by the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, which of course had everything to do with a political framework which he was advocating, which was against the interests of the then ADL, which was, you might be surprised to find out, both a cutout of the labor division of the Central Intelligence Agency at that point in time through the Socialist International, and also a cutout of the Federal Bureau of Investigation of J. Edgar Hoover at that point in time for COINTELPRO purposes. So, we have some experience with being and it's interesting when we actually did an investigation of how come we're being called this. We found out by talking to the head of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine of the Anglican British Church of some renown in New York City. And he says, we've decided to tar him with the anti-Semitic brush. All right. That's coming from the top of the establishment. That's how they use Jewish organizations. So, I'd like people to just step back and think about that for a second. The best of the Jewish religion is its intellectual tradition, its deep intellectual tradition, and its deep contribution to what we all call Judeo-Christian civilization. That is a huge basic contribution to the present civilization we exist in today. The picture of the rapacious Jew, which is actually the Jew who's being utilized by the financial empire for purposes of using that profound intellect for evil purposes, is at the heart of all of these various anti-Semitic tropes. And, it doesn't have a lot to do with reality. You have essentially almost a new Sparta in the form of the current state of Israel. That was not the intention of Israel's founders at all. Okay, that's been the mold of the continuous warfare in the Middle East, which is a religious form of warfare. As I've said repeatedly, you have two British intelligence created cults at the heart of this: revisionist Zionism, okay, which is what through a character by the name of Jabotinsky, who was an agent of British secret intelligence, and through the character of radical Islam, which was actually created by the British to be a force of terrorism, to fight forever wars against the Israeli and Jewish population in the Middle East.
Yeah,
so
let's take that question. So we got a question a little bit ago, which comes right now. How is radical Islam a British surrogate? Please explain.
Yeah, it basically, if you look at the history of what people call political Islam, and there's a couple of books. There's books by Mark Curtis, which you get on Amazon, called Secret Affairs, which deals with the actual history of radical Islam as an instrument of British foreign policy. And that book is based on the archives of British intelligence itself. It's a very good overview. There's also a book by Robert Dreyfus, and I forget the name of it, but if you go to Amazon, you can actually take a look at it, who examines the very same topic in terms of the history of the Middle East and the emergence of radical Islam. We, me being the United States, all right, under Reagan and otherwise, funded radical Islam as a force against the Soviet Union through Zbigniew Brzezinski's insanity, in Afghanistan, and that in turn destabilized the entire area. You look at what actually came about, in 9/11, and there's an argument that has been made. I don't necessarily agree with it totally, but there's an element of that, saying that 9/11 is essentially blowback for the policies which the United States, along with the British, under British inspiration as usual, funded and used for warfare purposes to control oil in the Middle East, and as an attack on the southern flank of the Soviet Union. So I refer you to those sources. The proofs in there are absolutely emphatic, and you'll find, I think, an answer to your question. But it always is good to study the history in some depth.
Thank you. We're going to take this question here that just came in through the super chat. I believe other nations will now be watching how we react to this event. It has the potential to affect our country, our current trade and stability.
Well, I think other countries are clearly watching this. And I think it gets back to what Barbara has previously said. Clearly, the imperial elite are terrified of what Donald Trump has the potential to do, both in terms of the United States and in terms of a community of sovereign nations united against imperialism. So they clearly are trying to increase the chaos. I mean, besides the assassination of Charlie Kirk yesterday, how many school shootings have we had, or other horrific events, like the event with the Ukrainian refugee arena. So this is what they often call the strategy of tension. And obviously what the British would like, what the imperial elite would like, is for this to cause us further instability, to tear ourselves more apart, and so on. I personally think the opposite is going to happen. I think it is shocking new layers, just as the assassination attempt of President Trump was people are using this term obviously quite a bit now, a turning point in many people's minds. That's when Elon Musk made the decision that he was going to support President Trump. It obviously was a factor in RFK Jr.'s decision to support President Trump, but so many others where they realized this is bigger, this is more dangerous, this is more profound than anything that I previously thought. And to the degree that people respond that way and respond with a sense of a sublime mission, really to carry forward what Charlie did, I think it has the potential to strengthen President Trump's hand to continue in his intention to dismantle the free trade system and create a world of sovereign nations.
Thank you, Susan. I want to take a quick follow-up from the guy who asked a question on Magnus Hirschfeld. He said, my dad grew up in the Hitler Youth, mandatory. He did not really talk about the Jews, but he sure did not like Churchill. I will say that. Thank you, Coldwater, for your question and for a little bit of that historical insight there.
Your father was discerning. And in fact, while we're mentioning books, we've mentioned one before, but I think it's a very useful book for everybody who is raising questions about the Jews, is the recently published book by Richard Poe entitled How the British Created created communism and blamed it on the Jews. This is a very well-researched, totally sourced book. In fact, I think 25% of the book is footnotes. And people, I think, could really begin to disabuse themselves of some of their noun problem about the Jews if they read that book.
Okay. I have another question here from BW. And BW has been a long time. He's been following us since the beginning of these live shows, I think. BW, quick question, quick ideological question. Do you guys consider yourselves right-wing? I know you say it is wrong to divide ourselves. I still don't see how we unite with people cheering Charles' death, but do we consider ourselves to be right-wing?
Well, we don't really base ourselves on the seating arrangements of the French Assembly, during the relevant period. I mean, that's where these terms actually come from. We consider ourselves to be, if you want to look in history, we consider ourselves to be in the mold of Abraham Lincoln's Republican Party. And we think that the MAGA movement is really a direct descendant of that political tendency in American history. There's a second question about what do you say about the people cheering Charlie's death? Well, look, I mean, their entire operation really is to use ignorance, if you will, or naivety as exists in many young people, to mobilize for their cause. If you look at the plan for 2020, if Trump won the election, it was all about how do we use the George Floyd insurrection to actually control gangs of youth, to actually run rampant if the military comes in and seizes the White House from Trump. That's literally what was going on at that point. All right. So Charlie's method was completely different. He was willing to go into the lion's den. When, in Utah yesterday, 1,000 people at the college that he spoke with signed a petition to actually cancel the event. 7,000 students, apparently in Utah, signed a petition to cancel the event. That's what these guys are actually doing. And Charlie's methodology was, damn it, I'm going to basically go forward anyway. He had, levels of protection. He was wearing a vest. In fact, the current thing I'm actually hearing is that the result of the bullet in the neck was the guy was actually aiming for center mass, and it deflected off his chest into his neck. The point is, no, you don't have to, get along with the people who are crazy. You do have to build a movement which is too big for them to actually have any degree of control over, period. And that's how we're going to overwhelm them. That, and actually prosecuting the people who are doing this, as the president said, and taking apart their infrastructure and all the foundations and everything else that fund this type of stuff, which is the clear outline which the president had in the speech, which we opened up with. And I believe if it is next man up and people really unite around what this happy warrior, which is what he was, actually brought, the joyfulness that he brought to political battle and to war, to actual war, if people adopt that attitude, which, you know, Friedrich Schiller would call the sublime, which is a unity with God and Christ, I think you actually overcome anything they have to throw at us.
Yeah, and I mean, I certainly understand, you know, you're doom scrolling, you know, and you see one of these insane people cheering his death or whatever. And it's easy for your first reaction to be, I wish I could punch them in the face. But it probably wouldn't hurt to stop and think how tortured these people are. I don't know if some of them are probably redeemable. Some of them may not be redeemable, in which case one ultimately has to feel even more pity for them in terms of how tortured they are. I think it's extremely important in a period like this to just constantly be looking at your own emotions and educating your emotions, not denying them, but educating your emotions in a time like this.
Thank you, Susan. We have plenty of questions here. Next one is a comment. Thank you, Susan. I ordered that book just now so I can learn and grow how the British invented communism and blamed it on the Jews. So everyone, that's actually the name of the book. It's a very awesome book. We're actually in dialogue with the author a little bit. We have a little back and forth so it's definitely an awesome book. You can just Google it. It'll come up on Amazon. How the British invented communism and blamed it on the Jews. Okay.
And by the way, it starts out with the person that the gentleman's father mentioned earlier, Winston Churchill, just to give you a sneak peek.
All right, and just here's a comment that we always have to slightly apologize for. Could you please maybe stop saying the British, please? We Brits are prisoners in our own nation. It's the elite bankers and the royal families pushing these demonic agendas, not the men and women of Britain or the men and women of England. Yes, we don't mean it like that. It's just kind of it's kind of an American English thing. Okay. Again, very sorry about that. Yes. Okay. But here's another very good question, continuing on the British angle. Why does Britain always force us into their wars and not other countries? They promised Zelensky he would stay dictator if they could loot Ukraine. They would dupe the USA into protecting him via NATO. So why does Britain force us into their wars? Thank you.
Because we insist on being stupid. In many respects, you can look at the history of this. Again, after World War II, the British were essentially bankrupt, and they managed to convince us to take their role formally in terms of taking over their bases and everything else, becoming the policemen of the world. They, for example, sent a guy, MacDonald, to Singapore to actually take our generals and give them wonderful sessions about how the United States, if we didn't get involved in a land war in Asia, namely Vietnam, that all the dominoes of every Asian country was going to fall to communism. And they actually succeeded in convincing people of that. All of this stuff in terms of the history of the British Empire comes, most people will not be startled to find, from the universities. All right, that's kind of an astounding idea, but the entire roundtable movement drew all of its intellects and all of its recruits who actually functioned as part of the what we call the modern British financial empire from All Souls College at Oxford. And people were essentially, groomed to assume these various technical posts in administering the empire and in creating consensus between the elites of New York and Wall Street and Washington and the elites of the modern British financial empire. So we agree with everybody who's saying, yeah, it's the British Empire, not the people, that's the problem. We'd like to basically see, as the British people are indicating they're doing now, they themselves joining in the battle of actually overthrowing this hideous monster which sits on top of them.
But I'd also make one correction to the previous question. The British currently, in the more recent period, we have been their main dumb giant, which I think is where your question is coming from. But all you have to do is cycle back 150 years or so, and you will find that every war, whether it was China and Japan, World War I, which we didn't get into till the very end, was very much born of the British Empire's fear that they were being challenged by both Russia and Germany. So they got them fighting each other. But you could draw a huge list of the countries that have been pitted against each other by these geopoliticians, these British geopoliticians, over the last century and a half. The United States seems more prominent because we emerged out of World War II as the major power, and we were therefore, as I say, the dumb giant that they especially had to manipulate.
Thank you, ladies. Just a quick recap. My name is Adam. I'm a producer and editor here with Promethean Action. This is our weekly live Thursday question and answer show. We do it every Thursday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. If you've been enjoying this broadcast, please like and subscribe to this video. It does send a positive message to the YouTube algorithm. And if you've been around for a while and you really want to stay in touch with us, please get our free newsletter at prom.ac or just search the web for Promethean Action. We'll send you updates. We have new videos, new live stuff. We send something once a day. We really want you to be a part of our community. So consider getting a free newsletter. And please keep sending in questions in the chat. I have some more loaded up, but I'm going to need some more in a few minutes. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and I will try to get to them. All right, so I'm gonna go to we do have some questions we chose from last week. I want to go to one that I think is going to be important unfortunately, now that Charlie has passed, the issue of the midterms is now coming into focus very quickly. So clearly we will need help to vote for properly vetted non-rhinos in the midterms. Will you help? Thank you, Bonnie.
The answer is yes. We have a PAC called Promethean PAC, which is going to be solely dedicated to the midterm elections. We have one post, which is an overview of what the actual stakes are and how it presently lines up. Although, I believe that this event is going to have an enormous effect in a positive way on the actual composition of the midterm vote. The second thing, we have one post up. I was working on a post yesterday when this all happened, and I obviously had to stop. But it's going to spotlight Michigan, and it's going to spotlight the battle which is going on there. We're going to do this from the standpoint initially of where we are and where we can give you the most graphic and well-refined report of what is actually going on the ground politically. And so what we're going to do is feature over the next couple of weeks reports from Michigan, from Texas, where there's obviously a redistricting fight going on, from California, where there's a huge redistricting fight going on, which will have really an effect far beyond these midterms, from Washington, where there's one congressional district, which is really at stake. And then hopefully off of those reports, and, we also have a friend of ours who is actually out petitioning now to run for Congress, Mike Steger, and you probably have seen his Monday night updates on policy on Promethean action. But our idea here in Michigan in particular is very much around the idea of mobilizing the same vote that turned out for Trump. If we do that, we can pick up seats in Michigan. The Republican conservative, the Republican Congressional Committee has a very conservative kind of orientation at this point, and that they're kind of only challenging one seat. We think there are potentially 5 seats which can be effectively challenged in Michigan. And what we intend to do is focus on youth, focus on labor, and focus on those minority communities, including the Arab population, which turned out for Donald Trump in 2024. So yeah, we're 100% going to help you. But I also think that the rhinos are going to be forced to change by this event in particular. That we're going to see as this evolves exactly where they stand. And I think that there's going to be a diminution of their impact on the overall Republican Party in terms of control. So that's where how I sort of answer your question from the standpoint of Promethean PAC. Now, what we're doing right now is we're getting out, we find wherever we are that the most Republican voters don't understand the Trump platform very well, particularly the economic side of the platform. The old Republican Party, if you watch Fox News, is almost exclusively focused on wedge political issues. What Trump is doing is he is completely revamping the party in the mode of Lincoln. He's making it a party of the working man, the traditional constituency of the Democratic Party, who sold all of these people out completely, sold the working class and the middle class of this country completely out through their deindustrialization policies. So what we're doing is we're mass distributing this flyer. We're asking people to go to the PAC site, to order some, to take responsibility for organizing in your area across the nation, for getting this understanding, which is laid out very concretely on this particular flyer, to everybody that you can talk to among your friends, neighbors, associates, and get back to us with the reactions, because we actually need to know where people have blocks, where they're not thinking correctly, because this is very new. After all, we've all been taught in the last generations that the metric for the economy is Wall Street, not the economic productivity of the population, which Trump is now changing it to drastically. And it's that productive identity which has been most under attack by the modern British financial empire ever since the dollar was taken off the gold reserve system in 1971. Susan may want to have more to say, but our orientation right now is get this out broadly, organize around it, ask your representative or senator where they stand on this, and that will determine who's a rhino and who's someone who we can actually work with to get this agenda fully implemented.
Yeah, I'm going to take people to the back side of this half-page flyer because right here is your criteria. On the left side, we have the policies of the new Republican Party, and this is what you want to hold these candidates to. Do you support Trump's tariffs? Do you support economic nationalism? Do you understand that Trump is not afraid to use the government as a force for production and good? Do you agree with Trump in terms of protecting Social Security and Medicare? Do you understand to create the kind of jobs where one income can support a family? And do you understand Trump's peace through strength policy and his rejection of the forever wars? And then, of course, on the right-hand side, you see the uniparty policies, which just give you a very, very stark contrast. So that's your criteria, right? That's your beginning criteria right there. We often talk about rhinos. They're relatively easy to identify. It's a species that's been around for a long time, but a new species emerged really very much around Trump's third run for the presidency in 2023 and 2024. And those are the people who are not really supportive of Trump's policies, but read the writing on the wall and are opportunist enough to say that, well, at least I have to sound like I'm pro-Trump. I call them trinos, Trumpers in name only. And the best way to flush out a trino is especially these criteria right here, because many of these trinos still cling to free trade, and especially they still cling to the forever war policy, the fact that we have perpetual enemies in the form of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and so on. And Donald Trump is very clear. He is very tough with those countries when their interests coincide, where their interests conflict with ours. He's willing to take action, as he did in Iran. But he does not consider these countries to be our permanent, implacable enemies, as the British geopoliticians wish they would. So that's one of your easiest criteria in terms of finding a trino. So again, we encourage people, get copies of this. There's a downloadable printer-friendly version if you want to just get your feet wet with a couple of copies, or you have the opportunity to order them in bulk in this beautiful color form, which people find extremely effective. I reported last week that we went to the AFL-CIO's Labor Day March here in Detroit 10 days ago, and you would expect a hostile response from allegedly this crowd. And while we found, a quarter of the people among the several thousands who were at the rally wouldn't take it, because the minute they saw the word Republican, they just weren't going to go there. That was a quarter who wouldn't take it. We got out 400 copies of this to about somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 people. We got it to more than 10% of people who are intrigued by the idea that this is a new Republican Party. It is the party of labor. And I should tell people, one of the things that we're in the process of doing is seeing if we can pull together a kind of national Republican labor caucus in the country, so that people from trade unions and more generally blue-collar layers sort of have a home to come to, because most of the trade union leadership, even if they might be privately sympathetic to Trump, like perhaps the Teamsters in some regards, they're not coming out in that way. The Teamsters, as people know, didn't endorse either candidate in 2024, which was a relatively large signal. Other unions, of course, like the UAW, their leadership endorsed Harris. We know for a fact more than 60% of the UAW members voted for Trump. So we want to give those people some place to go. And finding people who will respond to that is one of the purposes of this half-page flyer. So again, we encourage you to go to our website and order them. The link's right on the bottom. You're muted, Adam.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This is our live Thursday question and answer show, where we take your questions from the live chat. We also take questions from our newsletter subscribers. So you can get if you want to subscribe to our newsletter, you can see the link in the description to this video. Okay. So let's continue on here, because we still have more questions, more good questions. All right. So next question comes from Robert. Does Promethean Action have a game plan to keep us out of the World Bank as proposed by the World Economic Forum? And he asks a quick follow-up. What will happen to the debt owed to the Fed if the Fed were to merge into a World Bank system? Thank you for your question, Robert.
Susan, you want to handle that, or you want me to take a shot?
Well, I'll just say, whatever the fever dreams of the World Economic Forum at the moment, I don't think Donald Trump is going to merge the Fed into a World Bank. In fact, quite the contrary. If you look at the recent op-ed that Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, put in the Wall Street Journal, there are very, very serious discussions going on in this administration to reorganizing the Fed, to whittling it back, its mission, to its original mission. Now, its original mission wasn't great because it is a knockoff, basically, of the Bank of England and the Anglo-Dutch central banking system. And it's very contrary to what our own national banking principles are. But nonetheless, the original role of the Federal Reserve was much, much, much more constrained than the way that it is metastasized through some legislative action, or just in general after the period of 2008, when the Fed essentially became the bailouter of last resort, but also a very powerful director of capital. I mean, everybody says we don't like to pick winners and losers. Well, the Federal Reserve has been doing nothing but picking winners and losers, especially in the wake of 2008, namely keeping the major money center banks afloat, while the institutions which might lend to the productive economy, have essentially been pushed to the side or basically gone out of business. So I think the Trump administration is going in the opposite direction of turning us over to a kind of world central bank. I think it's going to be it's not going to be a short-term process in terms of getting back to national banking. But I think that the preliminary steps of beginning to constrain the Fed, of Trump putting people who are loyal to his policies on the Fed, and opening up the discussion. When have we ever had a discussion in any of our lifetimes about the independence of the Fed, the fact that it's acting against the interests of the president, it's acting against the interests of the country? Obviously, there was a small coterie of Americans who have understood this for a long time. There's been an End the Fed movement, audit the Fed, which I think is a kind of impotent step. If you're going to deal with it, let's not audit it, let's reform it or get rid of it. But that discussion is now opened up on a much, much broader scale. And when you have the Secretary of Treasury saying we have to re-examine the mission, the purpose, the structure of the Federal Reserve, we are definitely going in a different direction than more central bank control.
Thank you, Susan and Barbara. Okay, so the next question we're going to take is from our email list for a question I think is very appropriate today. So I'm going to bring it up. Okay, this is from Dennis. He's a longtime supporter from Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. On Monday's video brief, Barbara quoted Bertrand Russell in 1951, talking about using psychology to indoctrinate children under 10 to believe absurd ideas that aren't possibly true. Doesn't that sound like the transgender indoctrination that's going on today? Thank you, Dennis, for your question.
Absolutely. It's basically the whole idea which, became the prominent way of British imperial thinking about warfare after the invention of the atom bomb. And the idea was you're not going to have world wars to enforce imperial policies when you have the bomb. So what are you going to do to actually subjugate whole populations? And what Russell stressed, a friend of mine named Lyndon LaRouche called him the most evil man of the 20th century, and I think that's true. What he stressed and what all of the people associated with him stressed was the idea of dominating the educational system, destroying the family, going completely outside any type of family controls of children in order to indoctrinate. That's the quote I used, and you can go to my Monday brief and see it in full. And the second major thing, which is what I focused on in my Monday brief, was the use of drugs. And, when you think about the transgender ideology, it's the latest round of poisoning of our children. Many of the kids today have been on some form of pharmaceutical intervention since their beginning of childhood, be it Ritalin or some other psychotropic substance. My own nephew, because he was deemed to be unruly, was subjected precisely to this regime in his education, and it had a lasting impact. So that's, in my view, the transgender stuff, which Britain, by the way, has already, they started it and now they've abandoned it, leaving us with the residue of a massive, psychological warfare campaign, implementing precisely the policy of destroying family formation of children. It's the latest round, in my view, of their Malthusian policies, either based on economics, on epidemics, on wars, to reduce population to what they determine to be manageable levels for controlling purposes. So that's a long answer to your question, but I hope it answers it.
Let me add one other aspect to this in terms of Bertrand Russell, because I think it immediately gets back to Charlie Kirk. Russell also wrote a very, very chilling section of one of his books, and if I'm remembering correctly, it was The Impact of Science on Society, but I might be wrong, where he talks about how you need to have two layers of education. The elites need to be educated to think because they have to govern their society on behalf of the empire. The rest of the population is basically dumbed down with drugs, with whatever they need to do. But then they say, sometimes we have a problem. Sometimes from among the lower classes, and those are their words, you will find what they call an unruly intellect, somebody who will not be dumbed down, who is a thinker, who is a leader. And they said, well, you have two choices under these circumstances. You try and co-opt them and recruit them in to be a servant of the elites. And, there's a lot of people you can think of, perhaps, who have been Rhodes Scholars, one particular previous Democratic president that I'm thinking about, who, namely Bill Clinton, who ended up in that path, serving them, coming from the lower classes, clearly, but co-opted and served them. Maybe there was a little independence here and there, but ultimately not. But if you can't co-opt them, then it says you're faced with the choice of sending them to the lethal chamber before their unruly ideas infect other people among the lower classes. And, essentially what you just saw was the lethal chamber yesterday. But what must be our response to that? More unruly intellects among the lower classes so that they can't pick us all off.
Thank you, Susan. So we have an update from our friend Tony Pappert, who writes in, Lord Manderson was just fired as U.S. ambassador to Washington. The immediate issue was his ties to Epstein. So thank you, Tony, for the update.
I will point out that in my midweek update yesterday, that was the lead issue. I identified that the real scandal of the Epstein files was Lord Mandelson.
Yeah, YouTube didn't seem to like our video, so go to our channel and watch the video we posted yesterday. It was prescient. Thank you, Tony. Okay, I'm going to take this quick question because it's something that comes up quite often. Karen asks, does the Fed Reserve have our gold bars instead of Fort Knox? Thank you, Karen, for your question. I simply I don't think we know. You want to say anything? Anyone?
I doubt it. Basically, this was a big issue which was brought up by people, including Elon Musk, at the beginning of the Trump administration, based on the fact that central governments have been buying up gold like crazy, based on the fact that the kind of economy which Trump is overthrowing here is still dominant in the world, and those economies are collapsing. So they've been buying tons and tons of gold. And, there was even a mission which the president and Elon were supposed to take to Fort Knox to just figure out whether the gold was there. And they kind of dropped it. And I suspect if the gold wasn't there, they kind of would have proceeded with the thing. So I think that's I'm a little bit doubtful of that hypothesis.
Okay. We're going to go for about 15 minutes. We have plenty of questions here. So I'm going to take some interesting ones. I'm going to take a comment from Canada because we have so much support in Canada. I want to make sure they're represented. From Scott, I'm Canadian. Will Trump move to force these insane liberals out? Many of us believe that the last Canadian election was rigged. Thank you, Scott, for your question.
Well, Trump has totally posed the question, what's your relationship to the United States? And Mark Carney, who is the preeminent central banker in the world, was chosen to go and become the new head of Canada because Justin Trudeau was too much of a wimp. And essentially the idea was that Carney is going to salvage Canada for the crown. I do not doubt that there may have been some rigging of the Canadian election as a result of that. For people who don't know, Carney is the former head of central banking for both the Bank of England, the only British subject who ever became the head of the Bank of England outside of a British subject. He was also the former head of the Central Bank of Canada. He is completely integrated into the globalist network. He gave a speech in 2018 at Jackson Hole in which he's the guy who called for a digital world currency at the same time as it was argued by BlackRock, who he's very close to, that politicians should simply give up all control of spending of their governments, and it should be taken over by experts to handle the oncoming financial crisis. So when Trump wasn't kidding when he said, and his fundamental idea is he wants to construct a security alliance within the Western Hemisphere. There are vast projects which we could do together with Canada and Russia in terms of developing the Arctic, which would open, I believe, a whole new era for mankind. A wonderful idea of creating a land bridge between Russia and the United States and exploiting all of the minerals which actually exist and raw materials which exist in the Arctic and in the upper plains of Russia. Carney stands in the way of that. It would create a boom like something you've never seen before were that to be realized. That's what Trump clearly sees as his vision. How Canadians respond, whether they respond as citizens or subjects, can you actually create an electoral crisis in Canada? Can you actually create an overwhelming majority in Canada to overthrow such as Mark Carney? That's the question which is actually posed to Canadian citizens. And you go back and think about Charlie Kirk's mindset at 18 years old, looking at the United States and the devolution track we were on, and his singular determination to defeat that as his life's mission and you get an idea of what true citizenship of the world is actually all about. And I think that's the kind of thing you've got to think about if you're a Canadian at this point in time.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, whoops, excuse me. That was the last question. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you're just tuning in, my name's Adam. I'm a producer and editor with Promethean Action, joined with Barbara and Susan. Together, we do 3 political updates a week, plus a live question and answer show, which is what you're now tuning into. If you'd please like and subscribe to this video. We do 3 updates. We don't want you to miss the next one. If you've been tuning in for a while, I urge you to get our free newsletter, email newsletter. You can go to the website prom.ac or just search the web for Promethean Action. Will be the first result. And once you go to our website, you'll see the subscribe button. It's all over the place.
Adam, I want to thank Marianne, Joyce, Christine, and Michael. They ordered copies of our half-page flyer, and we look forward to working with you to shake things up in your localities.
Yes, and I also like to thank David, who made a $1,000 Promethean Action subscription today. We appreciate your support. We'll get back to you tomorrow soon, too. Okay, so we're coming down to the last few questions here, but I still think we have some interesting ones. So one of the things that people have been asking about in the chat is voting machines. What can we do about the voting machines, the Dominion voting machines? I remember growing up in Philadelphia, we had these terrible electromechanical voting machines in the city of Philadelphia. And I remember as a kid, every election, there'd be problems with the machines. It was just terrible, just election after election. So what can be done about the voting machine situation here in the United States? I think a lot of people want to go back to paper, and that's something that Trump has hinted at quite a few times now.
Well, the first thing I'd say on this, I think it's extremely important. Charlie Kirk was much more powerful than Dominion voting machines. What he did in terms of mobilizing the youth, what other people did, what Donald Trump did in terms of mobilizing blue-collar workers, Muslim and Arab Americans here in Michigan, and so on, we made it too big to rig, despite the fact that there are these crappy machines all over the United States. So I always say, never sacrifice the offense for the defense. Now, when it comes to defense, obviously you need a robust election integrity operation. Yeah, the machines are ridiculous. Countries like Lebanon, do paper ballots and have the results, the same night or the next day. So surely we could do that as well. The question of doing it is a little more of a challenge because under the Constitution, the states do have primary responsibility for the methods and means of elections. Now, Donald Trump is talking about executive orders to go back to paper ballots, same-day voting, and all of these kinds of things. He could do that on a federal level, as far as I understand. Barbara might correct me on that. But you are still stuck with the fact that many of our states at the moment are still in the hands of batshit crazy Democrats, like the state I'm in, which is Michigan. So, you have to fight the terrain you're on. Are we going to be able to get rid of all of these machines, say, for the 2026 elections? I'd be happily surprised if we did. So fight those battles as hard as we can. But again, never sacrifice the offense for the defense, because that's how we won in 2024.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, let me take off this banner here. All right, still have some more interesting ones here. This is a question that I was going to put up another question that was given to us last week, but one came in, it was almost similar. So we should just talk about this again for just a few more minutes. And thank you, Weldon Morgan, where is the curriculum to begin to study the American system of political economy?
Can we share the screen? Okay, we can start here. Go to the Promethean Action website, go to the Toolkit tab at the top, and you're going to find a variety of things. The pamphlet, the ebook I referenced before, the British Who Assassinate American Presidents, is there. Our ebook on the American System 2.0, which is just a good basic introduction, is there. And we have a number of full-length books that have been written by our authors. Brian Lance is an author who writes extensively about the physical economy from an American system standpoint. And Robert Ingram, you can see a big pile of books there, has written about history from the standpoint of imperial systems versus our system. And he's written some extraordinary books on William McKinley, on Abraham Lincoln, on George Washington, on the question of national banking versus central banking, all of which you can find there. That will probably keep you busy for a while. People should also know, if they do not, we conduct a live Saturday night class every week, which often features these authors. Brian Lance did the class last week. Bob Ingram has done recent classes. Thank you, Adam. Those shows a picture of some of the many books that we have. But I encourage people to go to, again, the homepage of Promethean Action, and up in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see our classes. You can click on, thank you, Adam. Yeah, there he goes. The Saturday class is there. If you go to that page, it will give you the option to sign up to be notified of these classes. And otherwise, what you will find is all of our recent classes, which address many of these questions. So yes, we are here to educate.
So just one last time, to see our toolkit that has a list of books, you can go to our website, which is at prom.ac. You can also just search the web for Promethean Action Toolkit. If you're on our website, it's just right at the top menu bar, or if you're on mobile, you just have to pull out the menu and you'll see a link that says Toolkit. Okay, let's just take a last few ones here. Here's an interesting one from Rudiger, which I think is actually a lot more relevant than people think. Any thoughts on asteroid 1, I think it's 1I Atlas, heading this way? I don't know about this particular object, but I think this is going to be a question that's going to become increasingly relevant as mankind continues to grow. So what's your thought on these kind of extinction level asteroids that could actually strike the Earth?
Well, what Donald Trump is actually talking about when he talks about a Golden Dome defense of the United States is he's talking about the ability to track and actually destroy these things, as well as incoming missiles. And we've got to actually go full bore on developing these technologies, which he's doing. So I think the only thing that can be done is here. We want to emphasize the defense, and that's what's really important.
I might add, I might be mistaken, but I think that asteroid is an asteroid which is taking a very atypical trajectory, and there's a lot of speculation out there about that. But I think it just underscores the fact that we got to get out there and find out what's going on.
All right. Quickly looking through final questions ahead. How about this? This is the last one, because I think this is historic and good. I know Lyndon would definitely get a kick out of answering this one, for sure. British Empire is a descendant of the Roman Empire. Anyone like to make any historical comments on this?
Well, it's absolutely true. You got to go back even further. You know, you go back to the Persians, you go back to the Babylonians. Again, this is why I think Aeschylus's trilogy, of which we only have the first, Promethean Bound, is so important. But yes, I mean, there is a lineage of these empires. The immediate the modern day British Empire comes out of an Anglo-Dutch configuration that came directly from Venice, which did come directly from Rome. This is something that Bob Ingram has addressed in his book on national banking. So it is definitely a descendant of the Roman Empire and even further back.
Awesome. All right, everyone. I'd like to thank you for tuning in to this was the 7th episode of our weekly live question and answer show. I urge you to like and subscribe. Don't miss our next political briefing. I'll put the link up where you can get our newsletter one last time. There's also a link in the description. Get our free newsletter. Let us stay in touch with you. And any last words, ladies, before we close up for today?
Well, I think people should turn to the things that comfort their souls, whether it is the Bible, whether it is great classical music, whether it is great classical art, or whether it is simply the commitment to make sure that Charlie's mission does not die with him.
I think I want to emphasize what Susan had to say about turning to great classical music, particularly to the young people who are suffering right now based on Charlie's death. Brahms wrote a wonderful requiem. It's called the German Requiem, which has a very famous 6th movement involving when you have actually fulfilled your talent that God gave you in life. And the parting words are, "O death, where is thy sting? O hell, in essence, where are you?" And that is essentially a very sublime statement as to what our life here on earth, though limited, is really all about. So I highly recommend that you get a recording of that. I sent Adam a couple which were suggested to me, and maybe he can put them in the links, including the English translation. But I think if you think about that and really spend some time, you'll find that it is a great comfort to you and a great way of moving your soul to move forward. And that's how I'd end this.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. I'd like to thank everyone who is watching, and also for the people that are in the chat. Thank you, everyone, for stopping by every Thursday, and we hope to see you next week. Take it easy.